Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now back in January of 2019, Nvidia launched the 6GB RTX 2060. In July of the same year we got the 8GB 2060 Super. Fast forward to December 2021 and this thing appeared, or rather it didn't because it was launched silently without an official retail price and finding one seemed impossible. Oh, did I mention this happened during the GPU shortage too? What exactly is it then? Well, this is a 12GB RTX 2060. It's not just a 2060 with more RAM because it has the same core count as the 2060 Super. That makes it closer to a 2060 Super overall then, right? Well, probably not, because what it gains in CUDA cores, it loses in bus width. It shares the same 192-bit bus width as the original 6GB card. Oh, and it has a higher TDP than both. When it comes to gaming, it'll sit somewhere between the 2060 and 2060 Super, at least it did at the time based on a handful of reviews that I've read. There really doesn't seem to be a big used market for these. There are plenty of 6GB 2060s on eBay, but this thing remains pretty scarce. I've got a 6GB card on the way for comparisons, but for now let's see how the 12GB one performs and whether it can make use of all that extra memory. While extra memory won't of course turn what was and still is an entry-level RTX card into a high-end one, it can definitely have a positive impact on performance in some cases, meaning the difference between playable and unplayable. Indiana Jones is a good example. I haven't played this for a while, but I remember it crashing with 8GB cards or lower when using higher settings. It actually defaulted to high with the 12GB 2060 and ran without issues, but I ultimately settled on the medium preset for a better experience. I avoided any upscaling today, as I usually do with these retrospective videos, to get a true idea of how a card is doing. With Indiana Jones, we're looking at an average of 57 FPS at medium with TAA, and some pretty consistent percentile lows. We're definitely making use of the extra VRAM here. In fact, most of today's games will exceed 6GB of memory usage, the amount available on the standard card. Next up we have Counterstrike 2 at 1080p with a high preset and 4x MSAA for 226 frames per second, a 1% low of 106 and a 0.1% low of 82. This felt a little bit jumpy to be honest, and I'm not sure if this has happened since the latest update or perhaps the game just doesn't agree with this 12GB card, but doesn't seem to feel as smooth as it usually does. For Grand Theft Auto 5 Enhanced, I went with the very high RT preset, so ray tracing was also enabled, and we also had TAA switched on for 73 frames per second, a 1% low of 59, and a 0.1% low of 57. Utilising the maximum RT preset isn't a good idea unless you're happy with plus 30 FPS or you're willing to use some form of upscaling too. I found that the very high RT preset was a nice place to be for this one. Helldivers 2 at 1080p with a medium preset next with the high textures and AA on meant 72 frames per second on average with a 1% low of 64 and a 0.1% low of 61. In Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 at 1080p with a high preset and SMAA2TX enabled, we saw 64 frames per second, a 1% low of 57 and a 0.1% low of 54. So again, a very consistent experience in Kingdom Come 2 here. We're not exceeding 6GB of VRAM by much, but we are definitely exceeding it here, so double the amount of VRAM is probably helpful, especially when it comes to those percentile figures. For the Battlefield 6 beta at 1080p, I went with the medium preset and TAA for 88 frames per second. The 1% low was 68 and the 0.1% low was 57. So again, this was a very nice experience for the 12GB 2060. Cyberpunk 2077 at the high preset with high crowds enabled as well saw 65 frames per second, a 1% low of 55 and a 0.1% low of 47. So no issues here. I also have this card paired with an i7-12700F and 32GB of DDR5. So we've got more than enough sort of power to turn the crowd density up as well here. And there were no major dips or drops with this one, though a lot of the time you will be seeing less than 60 FPS, especially with upscaling off. We can also enable ray tracing, of course. This is an RTX card, but I probably wouldn't recommend it unless you're willing to make some pretty hefty resolution sacrifices in terms of DLSS here. I used DLSS 4 with performance mode with the RT Ultra preset and saw 47 FPS, but there were a lot of dips and drops to the mid mid-30s. To finalise, we'll look at Oblivion Remastered at 1080p with a low preset. High textures and reflections were enabled just to sharpen things up a bit and make the water look a lot better. We actually got 60 FPS by doing this, but performance was a bit all over the place. That said, with the 6GB card, it's possible that we would have run into that issue with stuttering that seems to happen with Oblivion. When you run out of VRAM, it just turns into a juddery mess, and that wasn't the case here, which is nice to see. There we are, a card that's probably not that easy to find in 2025, and one that's still putting up a pretty decent fight in games. Thanks for watching, let me know your thoughts down below, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.